The Red Bull Racing team clearly has an advantage over the other teams. It's especially evident in the DRS zones, which are supposed to be speed traps that compel drivers to slow down. Red Bull enjoys an advantage because they are faster and approach the zones with a lot more momentum. So even when the Red Bull car slows down, it does so more quickly when compared to other cars that approach the DRS zones. Let's analyze this theory a lot more, so stick around. The Red Bull race car was so quick that Lewis Hamilton himself had to pay it a compliment. He said he had never seen a car go so fast. This was during the second race of the year, hosted in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. And to put things in perspective, Verstappen simply breezed past Hamilton with a speed differential of as much as 34 kilometers per hour. This was certainly enough to cause Hamilton to swing his head. What was that? Was it a cheetah or a gazelle? It was only Verstappen reinforcing his dominance over the pack. Hamilton's DRS wasn't open at the time, but Verstappen's own was. Irrespective of that, Hamilton could taste the dust. And that wasn't the only thing that impressed him. The RB19 was a complete race car going into this year's round of races. In one of the speed traps, Verstappen had an advantage of 6 kilometers per hour over the second fastest car. In essence, the car loses power as it decelerates when approaching the DRS zones. Small wonder, Hamilton had to exclaim his delight. But there's more to Red Bull's freakish speed. In real terms, comparing a fast car moving in a straight line with its DRS open to a slower car with the DRS closed doesn't do the observer any justice. Mercedes has so far earned the reputation of being a slow car, and the argument begins to look like the theory of relativity from physics. Essentially, a fast car will appear to move faster if someone in a slower car is driving along, and Verstappen's strategy involved overtaking Hamilton on the main straight after closing the gap on the last corner, where this specific DRS zone was situated. So all in all, Verstappen seemed faster at that very juncture. It turns out that Verstappen wasn't that fast overall, so Hamilton should have held his peace. Compared to other drivers and less the last-minute gasp, Verstappen was only faster by a factor of 1 kilometers per hour. This was exactly the case with Nico Hülkenberg, the Haas driver who was close enough to Verstappen by that same factor to almost catch him. However, what this ultimately proved is that the Red Bull car was highly aerodynamic both when the DRS trap was activated and when it wasn't. But for the benefit of the newbies amongst us who don't know what the heck a DRS zone is, here's a little bit of a crash course. And please, pardon the pun. DRS zones were introduced into the F1 rules in 2011. They were ultimately supposed to make overtaking easier. Essentially, when a car gets into the zone, it slows down to a generally capped speed, which drivers must adhere to. The zones themselves are strategically placed at certain points along the stretch of the racetrack. All in all, it makes for a more interesting race and encourages team strategy. The new rule was kicked against by fans, but the FIA didn't back down, and the rule remained. In the past, rules have come and gone depending on the needs of the sport. Hopefully, this will run its course as the racing sport metamorphoses. The DRS also includes an in-car component that has to be turned on by the race umpires as a car approaches the zone. This signals the driver to use the advantage in the best way he deems fit. The component is incorporated in the rear wing, which opens up a 50 to 85 mm flap to generate more downforce, thus enabling a car to attack and overtake the one in front of it if the driver so pleases. However, all cars are not permitted the same size of flap opening, and consequently, all DRS effects turn out differently. This is due to each car having its own unique expression of drag reduction. As such, Red Bull is still within the rules, technically speaking. This is because drag reduction ultimately depends on the geometry of a car's rear wing, which differs from car to car. So how exactly is the Red Bull car built to be so fast? Gary Anderson, who is an F1 expert, says it comes down to two things. The rear wing and the beam wing for the RB19 were the most innovative of the field. They helped produce better downforce effects even without the DRS turned on. All in all, these tweaks were attributable to a wider design philosophy being employed by the Red Bull team during this term. Add to that a more flexible slot gap for when the DRS is opened, and you have a winner. On the flip side, the Mercedes car design has sharp corners for its rear wing flaps that are not entirely aerodynamic. So there you go. But mapping the aerodynamics of a race car is a complex endeavor, and actions like opening a DRS flap can add to, or worse yet, take away from the entire aerodynamic footprint of the car. Ideally, opening a DRS flap should give a car as much as a 20 km/h boost in the best case scenario. that figure could fall to 15 kilometers per hour or even hover around 18 kilometers per hour. So car designers have to consider these constraints when rolling out an F1 car onto the track. The ultimate goal when it comes to DRS components is being able to manage downforce and, by extension, drag. Usually, when the DRS and flap are thrown open, the beam wing stalls as a result. That will, in turn, stall the rear of the underfloor. Stalling, in Formula 1 language, refers to the tendency of a car to produce less downforce and, as a result, less drag. If this balance is managed efficiently, it can give the driver an advantage of a few kilometers per hour down the road. And so, in conclusion, the ultimate design point to which Red Bull executed was to have a single-element beam wing that worked well with a diffuser that had a large corner fillet radius. When the DRS was opened, this beam wing setup worked less effectively, which was a positive thing. This meant downforce was miraculously reduced, with a cascading effect on drag reduction. You might as well call it the triple DRS effect, as it has come to be known ever since Hamilton exclaimed in surprise. This design format makes the Red Bull RB19 the best car for a good reason. On the other hand, Mercedes had a two-piece beam wing configuration. But the Mercedes car was also designed from the back, meaning it depended a lot more on its rear wing. The result was more downforce, and consequently, more drag, especially when the DRS flap was opened. The two-piece configuration complicated things further by not working as one piece to maximize the drag reduction effect from the rear. The result was a stiff and slow car. Kudos go to Adrian Newey and his technical team at Milton Keynes for producing such a groundbreaking car. To create such a car would have required a depth of knowledge on how aerodynamics influence a race car's chances. Race cars are much more than modular parts, and there are a lot more considerations involved with building them. For Adrian and his team, they saw the potential in building a car that maximized the DRS zones. It's already been 13 years since the DRS rule was introduced. Why didn't anyone think of incorporating it in race car designs for that long? Whatever the case, Red Bull can claim to be driving the complete car this season. Now here's a basic lesson for the other teams on how to design for DRS optimization. First, you start with the underfloor and work your way up to the beam wing like you're trying to solve a jigsaw. On the mathematical side of things, downforce is gotten at the square of the speed. So if the downforce and drag are termed x at a certain speed, when the speed is doubled, you get a square of your initial values for downforce and drag as x squared. This represents a fourfold increase in the parameters. So this little math exercise has to be taken into account when designing for aerodynamic loads. In addition, incorporating a floor edge sealing system into the car design allows the overall downforce to increase, but not at the square of the speed. Consequently, it permits you to deploy a softer suspension setup. This in turn reduces porpoising or bouncing problems in the middle of the car. This phenomenon, which has been called the dimmer switch effect, allows the driver to lean or ease into the DRS effect rather than forcefully switch in and out of it. Other than being an impediment, as is the case for the other racing teams, the DRS is an added advantage to an already great Red Bull car that works well in all conditions. You might even say that it's not rocket science after all, but it is in fact as fluid as a lesson in aerodynamics.